Hello again, everybody, and welcome along to another one of these interviews with me, Ben Calder, for the Bowen Therapy Professional Association, the
Mm,
BTPA. And I'm really excited today to have John Wilks with us, who is quite a legendary trainer within the field of Bowen. He's got almost 30 years under his belt now, and works both for Bowen Training UK, the CBS, does his own teaching as well. He's been the author of 5 books, numerous DVDs, and a lot of resources, as well as being one of the key characters in Our Birth Journey, work specializing in babies, children, pregnancy, and childbirth. John, thank you so much for joining me today. Thank you for being here.
no, you're very, very welcome, Ben. Really nice to see you again. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for you. Well, I just want to say how grateful I am for the session that you gave for the Bowen, the BTPA AGM last October, when you came
Mm,
along and shared some of the pregnancy and childbirth work with us, and some of the resources and examples you gave were absolutely mesmerizing
mm,
and have been a real help in my Bowen work
mm.
ever since. But what I'd really like to start with is just to get a little bit of a potted history of how you got to where you are today. What's your background in Bowen, and what's brought you to where you are now?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Ben. Well, I mean, the potted history is that I learned Bowen in '95, not knowing nothing about it, having never had a Bowen session in my life. And really was by accident. I was doing a lot of sort of reflexology, beginning to train in craniosacral therapy. And I remember just someone was on a course, an advanced massage course, and they said, "Have you heard about this thing called Bowen? It's the best thing since sliced bread," kind of thing. And I didn't know anything about it. And I went along to a course, which was a 4-day course at that time down in Devon. And probably before your time, Ben, but in those days, we learned everything in 4 days, everything that we kind of the basic course that we teach now, which is over 9 months, we learned in 4 days. And then they kind of, what would happen is that you would go away and practice on friends and family. And then Ozzy and Elaine Wrench used to come over twice a year at that time to England, and they would have what they called a refresher, where they would go over everything again and basically then say whether you were qualified to practice or not. I don't remember if they ever failed anybody, to be honest. Anyways, it was, and at that time, so then I started practicing in the clinic straight away. And one of the first things that happened, I remember, was that I was asked to give a talk about Bowen in the local clinic, and it was, I thought it would be okay, but I didn't know anything really. I didn't understand it. I didn't know what I was doing, and I showed up at this place, and it was absolutely packed out, and and then from that. It sort of really snowballed, and then I gave the head of that clinic a treatment, and his back pain, which he'd had for 10 years, miraculously went away. He said, well, "You've got to come and work here. All these people want treatments." And so it was very much in the deep end. And I learned very quickly, as one has to. And then I wasn't really satisfied by the kind of uh, explanations that were going around at that time around how Bowen works. So I sort of began to do my own research on this and reading, and the whole area around fascia research was just beginning to emerge really at that time, through Robert Schleip and others. And then they say if you really want to understand something, write a book about it. So I foolishly decided to write a book. That was in 2007, and from that, really, that kind of spun me into then. Well, actually, the teaching had started before that. That a lot of the book was based around some of the courses that I was running then, and then I started getting invited all over the world. So now, I mean, I'm going to Bulgaria tomorrow to teach. I do a lot in Eastern Europe. I just come back from America teaching. It's really, really had a massive impact. And as you said, Ben, thanks for pointed that out about the course on mothers and babies. That's the thing that I kind of like to specialize in, and so that's what I'm going to be doing in Bulgaria. And to be honest, in places like that in Eastern Europe, well, pretty much everywhere in the world, but particularly in Eastern Europe, it's sort of like it's absolutely a desperate need, really, for supporting mums and babies. And as you know from that course, you can do so much with babies to really change their lives. I mean, it doesn't, a few sessions or even one session will change a baby's life, to be honest. So, it's wonderful work to see it. So, yeah. So that's my passion,
Yeah.
really.
And what really got you kind of excited into that kind of that natal aspect of the work as well, after all the years of kind of doing Bowen in what I would class perhaps a more standard clinical format? What really drew you down that route?
Well, it's all of us are probably drawn to this work because we have some kind of wounds in us, the wounded healer, And I spent many years really looking at how early imprints affects us through our lives. And, there's a physical imprints and emotional imprints, and you could even say spiritual imprints. So how we come into this world really shapes us. And that coming into the world really would include certainly through conception, certainly through the pregnancy, what happens to us in pregnancy, and particularly around birth and the first year. And so it's really through my own exploration of that, which I started quite young. I think I started when I was about 19, looking at some of those things and realizing kind of what impacted it on my outlook on life and relationships, and particularly my nervous system, which is another thing that in those early days I didn't know about. I didn't really understand how our autonomic nervous systems work. But over the last 10 years, with the whole stuff around the vagus and new understandings about our autonomic nervous system, really began to make a lot of sense. And then really how Bowen affects that and affects our autonomic nervous system is very profound, actually, very profound. So I suppose what got me into this is realizing how these very, very early experiences, which go back to pregnancy, certainly, probably around conception even, but certainly through the pregnancy, certainly through birth itself and the first year, how they have this huge impact on how we relate to the world, how we form relationships, how our, as well as our physical health and all the imprints that happen there, particularly at birth, and our nervous systems, particularly our autonomic nervous systems, kind of get imprinted at this time, because so much of our early life in the womb and in the first year is focused around survival. And of course, our autonomic nervous system is all about survival. So it gets imprinted very, very strongly. And later on, when I began to understand how Bowen affects our autonomic nervous system in very profound ways and allows our bodies to kind of process stuff on a very deep level, so it really attracted me to that work. I mean, craniosacral work does the same. It's a different approach, but because I'm also a craniosacral therapist, but you can track it, you can see it in people how it's changing. So it's very, very profound.
Yeah, and it certainly is amazing. I can remember many years ago hearing the psychiatrist Stanislaus Grof talking about how birth trauma was probably the single most undiagnosed form of trauma that we were experiencing in our society, and just how important it was to go back and work with that type of material. But did you have any influences in that as well? Because you studied body-oriented psychotherapy and meditation quite early on in your career, I think pre-Bowen. So had that laid any of those initial seeds as well?
Yeah, definitely. I think particularly more recently, an understanding of trauma in the very early days. I'm talking about in the sort of 70s, early 70s, really, or mid 70s, when I first started getting interested in it. And at that time, there was not really a good understanding about trauma and how to work with it. So a lot of the early body psychotherapy was very cathartic. You would stir things up, and but it didn't necessarily go anywhere. So so for me, that was a personal, real personal interest. And then, as I say, seeing how those early patterns had imprinted me. I mean, you talked about birth trauma. I suppose, we all carry trauma, don't we? Probably from all kinds of aspects of our lives. And birth trauma is one of them. Over the last few years, I've got very, very interested also in prenatal trauma. And trauma has a bad press. Trauma is generally considered a bad thing, but we all have it to lesser or greater extent. And it's how we integrate it or not that's the issue. If we can integrate it, we can use it in a very positive way. But for most of us, it runs us. And you can see this running in politicians, in the general public, with devastating consequences, really, because we haven't been able to integrate it. So I think a lot of what we do in Bowen and all kinds of body work, particularly Bowen, is to help the person integrate experiences that they haven't been able to integrate. So whether that's physical things, something like a bad back, but it can also be psychological things, and particularly, as I say, through our autonomic nervous systems, we can often get stuck in particular kind of patterns. So we might be stuck more in our sympathetic fight or flight thing, and that just goes round and round and round until we can integrate it, or we allow another possibility, which is what Bowen does definitely, because it allows the body to drop down into something else. The body remembers that, and the body says, "Oh, yeah, I don't have to do this anymore. I can drop down into that, and I can live my life from that place." So yeah, it's beautiful.
And of course, I've come across within some of my work as well this variance between distress and eustress. So distress being the kind of stress that essentially is in excess to what a system can cope with, and eustress being something that is appropriately stimulatory to help temper and develop structure and strength and resilience within a system as well. So I guess part of what you're talking about in terms of when we're looking at appropriate integration is that stress being managed culturally at an appropriate level that we can integrate it.
Absolutely, because it is appropriate sometimes to get angry or to get upset. It's sometimes appropriate to withdraw. So yeah, absolutely. It's when it becomes inappropriate or it's repeating patterns which are no longer useful for us that it becomes an issue. Yeah.
So with this drive at the moment for the requirements over in Eastern Europe, where you're going over and doing a lot of training, do you think there's anything in particular that's making that so much more of a requirement for that part of the world at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I've thought a lot about this, and if you look at the culture there, obviously many of those countries have been through very repressive regimes. There's a lot of trauma in the society as a result of that, and then how that plays out in the medical system. I suppose there is, for example, midwife-led care is not really so much available in a lot of those countries, and a lot of the practices that they do there in a lot of those countries are quite I wouldn't say backward, but certainly not evidence-based. So for example, in Bulgaria, it's common and usual practice to separate the baby from the mother for 2 or 3 days after birth, which we stopped doing here.
Wow.
We stopped doing that here in the 1960s because it leads to severe attachment issues. I often wonder then, so what is it like for a whole society if everyone has been through that kind of experience, which is highly traumatic, really? And I don't have any answer for that. But certainly, anything we can do to help, not to blame, and because that doesn't work, but just to explain, why certain things might be better to do, like kangaroo births, like slower cesareans, where you have fake skin to skin contact, all these kind of things. So I travel there with my colleague Lena Clark as a midwife, and we talk a lot about this. And it's beginning to change things. It was quite funny, really. George Ilchev, who organizes the courses there for me, his wife actually was on our course once, and she heard stories about how you how in some cultures they keep the placenta afterwards and things like this. And anyway, she happened to be on a primetime television in Bulgaria where there was some sort of reality show, and she was talking about this on primetime television. And now she's actually become quite famous in Bulgaria as the person who actually ate her placenta. It's really quite funny. So last time I was there, people were stopping her in the streets and asking her for selfies. It was really hilarious. So you can see these things make a difference.
Sure. And that's good to hear as well, that actually by going in and educating and sharing other perspectives, that there is a change in the culture taking place. Big credit to you for that. What do you think has changed in the way that you practice over time as well? What from those beginnings back in the mid-90s, what understandings have really made a difference to the way that you present Bowen now?
Well, I try to do it with much more explanation. I know a lot of trainers talk a lot about the need for assessment and things like this. And assessment is a hugely broad term in terms of what we're looking for with people. Obviously there's the whole musculoskeletal assessments and the postural assessments and gait and assessments and all these kind of things, which are very, very useful. And then there's the more other things like, well, where are they at in their nervous systems? What sort of support do they have in their lives? There's all kinds of stuff around this. So I like, I suppose, what's really, really helped me is to be much more precise with the work as a result of understanding more how Bowen works. And I still feel we're in our infancy around it. But for example, if we understand how some of these receptors that we're working with in the fascia respond to the kind of touch that we use, that might influence how hard we work, how fast we work, how deep we work, using the breath and all this, depending on what kind of result that we want. So we can be very much more specific and much more precise with what we do. It's those kind of understandings I like to bring to this work. I think it's very it works very well, in my practice. Because I still have a clinic. I still work 3 days a week in a clinic, so I'm always discovering more from clients. But, I think now these days we're really there's so much dis-ease around right now that I think we're very we can be very challenged as therapists to really help, to know how to help people, and so much of that is around bringing people back into their bodies into a felt sense, bringing people back more into connection with each other and their sensations. These kind of things are simple but incredibly profound, actually. Yeah.
And I fully agree with that. And so, what do you think is then the hardest thing in terms of the concepts that you're trying to transmit to students, to people that you're working with? What do you think is the hardest thing for them to really understand about the process that you're undertaking with them?
Gosh, it's a good question. The hardest things. I don't. It's Bowen is still such a strange therapy, isn't it? From the outside, anyway, it's such a strange therapy that it's very difficult for people to let go of other stuff they've learned, I think, and really come at it from afresh, to see it for what it is, and to kind of work with what we give them. People are very keen to kind of add things in and get new techniques, and you know what I mean? It's like they want to be able to fix things. And this thing about just kind of like offering something up to the body, kind of standing back and watching and then deciding what to do. I mean, the thing is that the way Bowen obviously developed this work and worked himself was clearly through palpation. He was obviously very, very good at observation and feeling through his hands. And then he would respond to what he felt through his hands in a very precise way, then stand back or go and see someone else, and then come back and probably observe what was happening in the body as a result of what he'd done. He was, as far as I can understand, he was constantly feeling, reviewing, thinking what to do next. Whereas obviously the way we teach it these days is more of a technique which we're applying. We teach much less of the palpation skills, which I think is a mistake, because I think we should do more of that, really. I mean, coming from a craniosacral perspective, that works that way, that you feel something, you respond in a pretty subtle way, and you wait. So it's a kind of similar thing, but we tend to do it back to front. We tend to think, oh, well, I'll do this procedure, I'll do this move onto someone, rather than thinking, okay, let me feel what's going on here. Let's stand back. Let's see what happens if I do this and stand back. You know, having said that, what we offer with the, even the basic work, where page 1, 2, and 3, whatever you call it, or the BRM 1, 2, and 3, is such a powerful and profound thing to offer to someone, that, even if you don't feel anything at all, you're going to do some great stuff just by doing that. So, yeah.
Yeah, beautiful. And what do you think the biggest insight is that your students tend to get in the way that you deliver your work as well? What does your approach offer them that you get a lot of feedback from?
That's a good question. I mean, every teacher has their own kind of slant, don't they? Which is great. I suppose I tend to look at it more from a kind of more, well, as holistic a point of view as I can. And some students get frustrated with that, because they want a kind of like they want a recipe. You know what I mean? For someone comes in with back pain or shoulder pain, you do this or you do that. And I always want to say, you can't work like that. That's not respectful for you, for Bowen. It's not really respectful for a client, because everybody's so individual. And that can be frustrating, because people then they need to think, you know what I mean? So I like to get people to think about what you do, so yeah.
And I think that's a really important thing, and that kind of leads me on, but maybe it's already answered in that. In what do you wish that somebody had taught you when you started in this work that is now fundamental to the expression of bodywork as you do it?
I think one of the key things that I've learned also from craniosacral work is this importance of centering ourselves as practitioners before we start working on someone, and also to really concentrate on creating a sense of safety. I mean, now that we know from the whole work of Stephen Poydis and the whole polyvagal theory thing, how important safety is, I think that's something that we need to pay much more attention to as therapists before we put our hands on people, even before we greet them, and also then centering ourselves before we touch, and also just this whole thing about how touch can be so triggering for people. We take it for granted, don't we, that someone comes in and lies on our couch, but it's a very unusual thing to do in society. We don't normally do that. And it's a very vulnerable thing. So really paying attention to what their body is telling us. And sometimes, you might do some work on their back or something, but their body is telling you that they don't want it there. They want you to work somewhere else, or there's some trauma held in a particular area of their body, which if you work there would be too overstimulating. So it's really paying attention to those kind of things and centering ourselves. I think that's very, very okay. Do you want to put another question in the chat or something?
Sure.
I think we should be focusing on that. We are not. That's a really good question. To be honest, I really thought when I learned Bowen 30 years ago that it would become huge within the next 10 years, because it's so effective. I'm sure that all of you practitioners have had this thing where patients say to you, why is this not available on the NHS? Why is this not more popular? Because of the amazing effects that you see. So I honestly thought it was going to be more popular. I would love to say in 10 years' time that everybody is going to know about Bowen and everybody's going to be having it, that would be my dream. But I don't know, and I don't quite know where the resistance is coming in. I think we need to be much better at communicating to other health professionals, particularly, physiotherapists, osteopaths, nurses, consultants, doctors about what we're doing. And I think we've been hindered a little bit by the fact that it's so difficult to explain it. So being able to explain something more in their language, why do we do what we do? I mean, a simple thing, for example, would be to, if we explain the principles of tensegrity or biotensegrity and why is it that such light moves are going to have such a profound effect on people's posture, for example, or pelvic alignment and kind of thing like this. So when you explain it from the biotensegrity point of view, it becomes very, very clear. And then when you explain it from the point of view of, well, how are we affecting these receptors in the fascia, like the Golgi receptors, which have a big effect on proprioception, all those things, all that kind of language is familiar to doctors and physiotherapists. And then that's a kind of a way in. So I think we need to be much better at going out there and communicating with these people, so they don't just think that we're some weirdos and that we don't know what we're doing. I often tell people that we should be much more professional, in the sense that we should be keen to communicate. I often communicate with doctors. I write letters to doctors if I have some concerns about clients who are not getting the right care. But I know a lot of practitioners are not willing to do, or they feel, gosh, doctor's up here and I'm down here. But it's not like that. We're health professionals, and we need to have a lot of respect about our own ability, and particularly what the ability of Bowen to really heal. So I would say that's really one thing we need to do, is get out there more, be confident, explain it to people, do talks and this kind of thing. So I think that would really, really, really help. I admit it's not easy, but we have such a fantastic tool at our disposal here. It should be much, much more well known. Really, it's so fantastic.
I absolutely agree with you, John, and actually having people take those steps, having us practically next. Yeah. Just thank you so much for joining me today, John. Where can people find out more about you?
Yeah,
and
so
your
you can
work?
find out more. I've got actually 3 websites. We do a lot of online training for Bowen therapists as well, at ehealthlearning.tv. That's ehealthlearning.tv. Ben mentioned earlier my platform that I run with other colleagues for working with mums and babies. That's ourbirthjourney.com, ourbirthjourney.com. And then my personal site, which is around my clinic and my teaching, is therapy-training.com. So I would highly recommend you sign up to ehealthlearning.tv. We do loads of free stuff there. Won some really, really interesting interviews and podcasts with people. So have a look at that. There's a lot of Bowen therapists come on there, a lot around assessment. We do a lot of courses on there as well. So covering the whole range of stuff, from polyvagal theory to assessment to how to treat your clients and things like this. So have a look at that, ehealthlearning.tv. Thank you. Thanks so much, Ben. It's really a pleasure to be with you. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, John. Have a great day. We'll put links to all of those in the descriptions. And that's been me, Ben Calder, for the BTPA. And
thanks very much. Thank you. Bye, Ben. Bye.